Well, join me on a different kind of panel
Should announce it. This one is Owen Shroyer versus Will Chamberlain.
now. Three people who've all supported President Trump's re-election, but have varying views on the Iran war. Will Chamberlain, senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. Owen Shroyer, who's the host of the Owen Shroyer Show. And Caroline Sunshine, former Trump spokeswoman and deputy communications director in the 2024 campaign. Well, welcome to...
She'll be making the sandwiches.
All of you. Will Chamberlain, let me start with you. Just looking at this completely objectively, this looks to be brewing up to be not just a hell of a mess, but potentially a presidency defining mess for Donald Trump, and something that could cost the Republicans not just the House in November, but they're increasing rumor mongering in Washington. It could cost them the Senate as well, which is unlikely, but you got to say, if this war turns into a disaster, that could happen. What is your take on where we are with this?
I just have the completely opposite take from you. I think this is one of the most successful military operations that we've seen from the United States. The only possibly more successful one, I would say, would be the Venezuela strike, which, I mean, you can see the political effect of that. We already have diplomatic relations with Venezuela and flights to Caracas. But, I mean, we opened this war by killing 50 of the top leadership of Iran within the first 5 minutes. That's
Did it change anything for the better or for the worse?
Unheard of. I mean, everybody I feel like is kind of operating under, you know, we're still all have PTSD from 2003 and the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan, and aren't looking objectively at what has happened and the incredible competence demonstrated by the combined forces of the United States the United States Navy and Air Force and the IDF. The combination of the two forces has, I mean, put Iran completely on the map. The missile strikes are down 90%. Drone strikes are down 80%.
Must have been schoolgirl targeting missiles that hit those girls, because they must have been trying to. From the way he's talking, there's been nothing to even talk about that's negative. It's just been 100% success, the most successful in American history, according to Will Chamberlain.
5%, and it's been...
That means they were trying to kill those little girls.
A week. You know, people are talking about forever wars. I mean, those wars were 20 years. We're a week in, and people are already, I think, losing their composure over this. It's a really remarkably effective operation. A momentary spike in oil prices, I mean, is not going to shape things. I mean, think about how...
What are you crying about? You can't afford gas. Quit crying.
How quickly the news cycle moves in the modern era. In a week from now, I don't know that you'll be talking very much about this, Piers, given how fast things move. So I doubt that.
Well, let me respond to that. I mean, I think that, look, again, I'm just sitting here trying to be objective about what I'm seeing with my own eyes. I had very vivid memories of 2003. I was the editor of the Daily Mirror newspaper in the UK. We were the Labour supporting paper, so Tony Blair's supporting newspaper, and we took an anti-war position. And, you know, I remember all the arguments in the run-up to that war. I remember the initial early military spectacular success that was enjoyed by the Allies in Iraq. But then I remember the cold, hard reality setting in of what followed that, and no real plan for what was going to happen with Iraq, the rise of ISIS, the fueling of Al-Qaeda, and so on. Complete
deja vu, huh?
Mayhem followed because it hadn't been properly thought through. And what concerns me about this is not actually the clear, obvious military successes that have been enjoyed by the American and Israeli military, as you would expect. The American military is the most powerful in the history of the planet. It's not that so much. It's just that I think that with their responses, the Iranians are being quite tactically smart. What they're doing is they're trying to put the fear of God into people living in the Gulf states, many of whom are expats from other countries. They're trying to get them to leave, which many of them are doing. They're trying to destroy the business model of places like Dubai, which is it's a fun, completely safe place to come. And they're doing that by hitting hotels and airports and so on. And at the same time, they're controlling ruthlessly the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil flows. And, that is extremely concerning, not just because of the huge spike in oil prices and gas prices, but also...
No, Pierce, Will says that's a victory for us. Yay, we get to pay more for gas.
Because of the geopolitical element to that, involving China's reliance on it and Russia's involvement and so on. So I much as I'd like to be as optimistic as you are, I look at it and think, they may be being defeated in terms of military firepower, but the regime remains intact. They've replaced one Khamenei with another. The IRGC clearly have a stranglehold over the country. The combination of the bombing, putting the fear of God into Iranians so they're staying in, and the IRGC's control means there are no rebellions on the street that we can see. So Trump's idea that this would be an organic rebellion off the back of the bombing raids by the Iranian people is not happening. And I'm looking at it thinking, well, okay, maybe it will be over in a week, but I'm not quite sure how this ends as simply as you think it's going to.
All right. So there's probably about 5 or 6 big arguments that you made there. So I'll try and address each of them in turn. First, let's start with the Straits of Hormuz. I think you're overstating the extent to which the Iranians have control over the Strait of Hormuz. Their entire navy is at the bottom of the ocean, and the Americans are there to guard it. And I think the only really remaining threat is some of the missile threat from the south, which is being aggressively degraded by the United States. You made a really big claim, and I think this is extremely important. You made a claim about how the other Arab countries, because they are being bombed by Iran, that this is a sophisticated strategy that's going to get them to question their continued work with the United States. I think it's the opposite. I think they all realize they no longer want to live under Iranian blackmail. And I think they look at Iran flinging missiles in every direction. I mean, a couple days ago, they flung.
Funny he would bring up blackmail when we're talking about a war between Iran and the other country that's known for that. It's a weird thing to bring up.
Missiles at Azerbaijan. And that's an important thing to realize because the leader of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, was the one leader in the region to give condolences to the death of Khamenei. And how did they respond? By launching missiles at a school in Azerbaijan. And you saw
just
him
to be clear,
Will,
on this point, just to be clear, just crystal clear.
You ever notice how Zionists always project? He just literally tried to project blackmail onto Iran, and not like they're known for that. This is so crazy.
I'm not saying for a moment the Gulf states won't continue to support America. In fact, the complete opposite. I do believe it's been a massive strategic error actually by Iran to go after the Gulf states in the way they have. But I think from a tactical point of view, there's no doubt that in the short term, it has put the fear of God into people. And I think it may question the resolve of the Arab Gulf states, of the leaders, to want this war to be remotely prolonged, because they can see that the longer it goes on, the more damaging it gets to all of their collective interests. So I'm not, in fact, I think they are falling in behind America in terms of they hate what Iran is doing. We saw that from the Qatari Prime Minister overnight in an interview with Yalda Hakim from Sky News saying that. But that doesn't mean they want this war to continue. So the question then becomes, if there's a lot of pressure on the economics of this war, never mind the loss of life and so on the economics of the war, then how does this actually end?
So I think it actually ends up working the opposite way. I think that what the Saudis and the UAE and Qatar and Bahrain will decide is they don't want to permanently live under the threat of Iranian blackmail. And that's what this would be. If they made an early peace because they were scared about their economics, then Iran would just hold this over their heads indefinitely while they built up a huge ballistic missile capability, while they restarted their nuclear program. And then basically these countries would be at the mercy of Iran.
Or maybe it would just deter them from being allies with America, since we can't protect them because we're only focused on protecting that other country.
I think so. What that means is that the Arab countries will decide in their own interest that they want this war finished. And that even if somehow the United States steps out of the way, I think they'd end up finishing it on their own right, taking advantage of the weakened Iranian regime right now to try and impose their will on it, even if in a world where the United States retreated from the scene.
Okay, let's bring in the other two guests. Owen Shroyer, what do you say to Will's argument? Very bullish, thinks that this is ending quickly and it's going to be a massively big win for the United States and Israel.
Well, I think Will has his White House talking points down almost 100%. I'm not sure there was an original thought there. The one thing he missed was you're not supposed to call this a war, Will.
He read a book in the last
You're not supposed to call it that. Here.
Not supposed to interrupt. He just lets you talk all that bullshit.
Here we go.
You insulted me. We can keep doing this all day.
I'd love to, Will. I also find it funny that he keeps saying Iran blackmail, another talking point that is coming from Western media. As if we didn't just see the Epstein list and all the connections to Israel revealed with that. He says Iran blackmail. As far as the conclusions that we're reaching here, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about these conclusions about the Gulf nation states. You know, when this thing first broke out, they said, oh, it'll be all the NATO countries and the EU countries and the Gulf nation states, everybody lining up against Iran. Well, it hasn't really been that smooth. It seems like a lot of them want to maintain good relations with the U.S., but they're not so sure about what's going on with this war. And, you know, you bring up what happened with Azerbaijan. They come out and say, okay, we're against Iran, and then they get hit with a bomb, and you don't even scratch your head for a second. You don't even think for 1 second that could be a false flag, as if these things don't happen in war.
Wrong.
So I think that there's
backwards.
a lot.
They came out and gave condolences for the death of Khamenei, and then got bombed.
Okay. Well, we'll see how this all turns out. I don't think it's going as smoothly as Will likes to represent. Like I said,
I don't think Will even understood that Owen was implying that, yes, that may not have been Iran that did that. Some other country that's over there that's known for those type of sneaky fucking tactics, they may have bombed them and they just made it look like that. That's what he was trying to imply.
And I'm not sure there's an original thought there. This is the neocon. Will represents the neocon faction of right-wing politics that we thought we defeated in 2016. We thought we defeated again in 2024. This is the opposite of what Trump ran on. And that's the big thing here. We can debate about war and foreign policy. These things aren't going anywhere. The problem is this is a total betrayal of Trump's base. This is exactly against everything he ran on. And the 1984 Orwellian nature of the Board of Peace launching war after war after war and sitting here screaming about how Iran is firing missiles all over the world while Israel is in a war with 7 separate countries at the same time. The irony and the hypocrisy should not be lost on your audience, Piers.
I think this was before Lebanon, too.
Okay, let me bring in
2 months
Caroline.
ago.
You were a former Trump spokeswoman. Where does all this sit with Donald Trump's repeated mantra when he campaigned in the 2024 election of America first, no more interference in foreign wars, particularly in the Middle East? And now here America is in the biggest interference imaginable in the Middle East, taking on Iran in this full-blooded, full-throttle way. Where does that sit with how he campaigned?
Yeah, Piers, first and foremost, I love the American military. I love our troops, just like millions of Americans do. And that's why we were so excited when a candidate like Donald Trump came on the scene and talked about no more involvement in the Middle East and no new wars. And I would go on TV and say that on behalf of the president during the 2024 campaign. And I was proud to do it. I was enthusiastic to do it. It wasn't just that President Trump was talking about that, no more involvement in the Middle East. Criticisms of our past involvement in the Middle East were extremely valid. An indictment of the neocon political class establishment and their record in the Middle East. It was the passion with which he talked about it. You can go back to 2016 and you can see the fire in him, the passion that he was talking about it with.
Women love play acting.
It really electrified people and moved them to put him into the White House. And so he said no new wars. And I think people are confused right now in the base as to why it looks like we now are in a new war in the Middle East. You hear this talking point going around that
I've been sold out before. I wasn't confused.
90% of MAGA supports, this war. But that's not mathematically possible because if you look at the coalition that elected President Trump into the White House, if that was true, right, if 90% of MAGA supported this war, Nikki Haley would be in the White House right now as president. Marco Rubio would be president. I mean, the American people had a chance in 2016 to elect literally anybody else besides Donald Trump, who were all on stage in that Republican primary saying we would love war with Iran. They had a chance to do that again in 2024 by picking Nikki Haley as their candidate, but instead they picked Donald Trump. I also think if 90% of MAGA supports this, I don't think your show would be getting the views that it's getting. I don't think Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson's show would be getting the views that it's getting. Polling is sort of an outdated way of collecting information. They say Vietnam was the first living room war, but it looks like this is the first war in the social media age. And social media is a way for you to see in real time how the public is perceiving something. We certainly use that on the campaign, I can tell you. Social media is a more accurate representation of public sentiment. You can track it in real time versus polling. So this idea that 90% of the coalition supports that just quite literally isn't possible when you look at the wide swath of people, independents, moderates, Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan, young men who all joined President Trump's coalition specifically because they were really excited about the promise of no new wars. And I guess that would be my question to Will, though, is, first and foremost, do you think that this is a war? Because the president has been on the phone with reporters, a lot of them who he calls the fake news, Politico, CNN, Axios, New York Times, on the record in those phone interviews, calling it a war. The Secretary of War, has called it a war. But the president hasn't publicly come out and said to the American people that it's a war. So, Will, do you think this is a war? And is it a new war?
Well, it's a very good question, which I will get Will to answer. What I would say, though, is I don't think America has declared war, correct me if I'm wrong here, but since the Second World War, and yet it has repeatedly gone to war. And I do think it's a complete farce, I have to be honest with you. As someone who loves
Before we get into what Will thinks, the talking point is that we've been at war for 67 years or whatever, however long it was, and we just didn't know about it. So let's see if he's been mind melted into that, or if he's going to say something original.
America and loves your Constitution and loves Americans. The idea that you have not been waging war repeatedly ever since World War II is ridiculous. And the idea that this is not a war when the American mighty military has gone in full throttle against Iran, both at land, at sea, every imaginable way you can think of. It's crazy. Of course it's a war, isn't it, Will? Why do we pretend otherwise?
I mean, I think it's a war. I don't know what the legality of it is and why the president might want to avoid it. He might want to say, to use the language.
Well, he doesn't have to clear it with Congress, does
powers.
He? Well, the truth is they all do it.
I don't think any American...
They all do it. I mean, well, it's the same reason.
Think about
it's the same reason Clinton.
I hear you.
Yeah, but just to finish my point,
really good reason not to do that.
It's a reason Clinton didn't do it with Kosovo. It's a reason that Obama didn't do it with Libya. If you don't call it a war, you don't need congressional approval.
Right, but then we don't get to do things like knock out 50 of the Iranian leadership in the first 5 minutes of the war, right?
Or cripple the world economy by closing down the Strait of Hormuz. We don't get to do that either.
We lose the element of surprise. This is, this isn't 1760s where there's no telephone communication across oceans. The sooner England hears about our wars 3 weeks later when a ship shows up, instantly the moment we declared war, the Iranians would know what's up, and that would be the end of our ability to gain the element of surprise. And that saves...
As if Iran doesn't think we're in a war. Their shit's getting blown up. I think they know.
American lives. If we're going to do a military operation, I think that we want the commander in chief to do so in a way that minimizes American casualties to the extent possible. And so I think that it's totally justified for him to do that. I'm sorry, Caroline, I just am not impressed by saying that the polling doesn't say what it says. This is not just one poll that says 90% of MAGA supports it. It's consistently across all the polling that's done. You have 85% plus of Republicans supporting the president. And I think that it's because they understand that the president is not conducting the war in the manner of George W. Bush, that it's not stupid. You have to understand, this is not he created the space for negotiation after the 12-day war. You need to remember, he hit those 3 nuclear sites and then immediately forced a ceasefire, including telling Netanyahu and Israel to turn the planes around when they had been struck after the ceasefire deadline.
Will lives in a world where the Republicans are still popular, that people don't think they're the party that's owned by that other country. Will lives in that world.
Wanted a negotiation. He wanted to be reasonable. But the problem is the Iranians... It's like the Black Knight and Monty Python. They refused to accept that they were beaten and refused to make any concessions. You need to just go listen to Steve Witkoff, who Tucker and everybody loved a year ago, explain what his negotiations were like. They opened the negotiation by saying, we have 60% enriched uranium for 11 nuclear bombs. We have an unalienable right to enrich, and we're not going to give you anything on the negotiation table that you didn't get militarily. Like, what is President Trump supposed to do? And if he cowers in the face of this,
okay, but I would throw
not bomb countries off of bad intel from a country that's lied to us repeatedly. That's what he's supposed to do, Will.
Well, I'll let you
this is my question really quick, though.
Hang on. Look, on this very point that Will just raised, and I'd like to bring Owen back in here just to respond to this. But this is what Antony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, said about Israel trying to pressurize Barack Obama to launch military strikes on Iran, and saying they would just attack themselves if Washington refused. Take a listen to this.
Back during the Obama administration, the Israelis were pushing President Obama to take military action against Iran, and were warning that they would do it themselves if he didn't. And he wouldn't, because he thought the better way to get at the nuclear program, which is what we were focused on, in the days after the October 7th attack on Israel, the horrific attack on Israel by Hamas, the Israelis were insisting that in the north, Hezbollah from Lebanon was about to attack. And they wanted to strike preemptively against Hezbollah. And President Biden said, look, we're with you. We'll always be with you in defending Israel. And if you're attacked, we're there. But we're not there if you're going to start something. And we came within about 30 minutes of having a war in the north based on bad information that the Israelis had.
Big shock.
No, I mean, I found that really interesting to be reminded of that, because, you know, has Donald Trump been played here by Benjamin Netanyahu? Has he been sold a pup? Was he told, look, you know, they're going to go after us. We're going to have to attack it imminently. You're either in with us or you're not. And they said, okay, well, we better come in. I mean, is that what's happened here?
Well, I think you have two separate things happening. I think we have to recognize the power of the Israeli lobby. I think this is something that the average American is now very aware of, the power of the Israeli lobby. And so now AIPAC is trying to find new ways to fund their candidates that don't go through AIPAC because it has such a negative stench on it now. But then there's Netanyahu. So AIPAC buying our candidates to essentially sell out America's best interest is one thing, but Netanyahu is a completely different issue. He's been lying to the American people and the United States Congress since the 1980s. He's been saying that Iran has days until they have a nuclear weapon. So obviously somebody's being dishonest here. It wouldn't be the first time that Israeli intelligence has lied to us. I could look at some recent times. I think the whole story about Iranian drones off the East Coast, I believe that was false Israeli intelligence. I think that the strike on that school that just happened in Iran, I think that was bad Israeli intelligence that we acted on. So I think Israel has been giving us bad intelligence, whether intentionally or accidentally, for years. And I find it funny that we sit here, and again, it's this blatant hypocrisy and irony, except it's not funny because we say, oh, we're saving American lives. Well, at least 7 American lives have been lost in this war so far that we know of. We also had 3 people shot and killed here
Based off of a 3-decade-old lie, too.
At a retaliation attack at a bar in Austin, Texas, where I live. And as far as this number of 90% MAGA supports this, well, you can only believe that if you're counting the fact that the Mark Levins of the world who support this war more than anything, they get ratioed on every single post. And so they're the ones that are supporting this. They're the least popular. Tucker Carlson, whatever you think of his politics, he's more popular now. And so I just don't see these things adding up in real life. And I think the issue is we've been dealing with this centralized media and even a centralized political narrative that's been able to kind of get away with lying and deceiving the American people. Maybe that's because they were distracted. Maybe that's because social media didn't exist before. Maybe a combination of the two. But it just doesn't work anymore. We're not buying these talking points. And again, if you want to have a foreign policy debate, that's fine. The average American is sick of what's happened in the Middle East. And this is what resonated with that person while Trump was campaigning. Since 2015, we have spent trillions of dollars, at least $5 trillion, trillions of dollars in the Middle East. That's what we've done. And we've gotten nothing for it. We've gotten absolutely nothing but our blood and treasure in that region and nothing to show for it. And so Americans are sick of it. We would much rather spend $1 billion a day as the cost of this war. It's up to $10 billion now. We would much rather see that invested in our own infrastructure, our own people, our own country, whatever it takes. That's what this administration was supposed to be about. So if you want to say 90% MAGA supports this, then you have to account for at least 40% of the people that were once MAGA are not MAGA anymore. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And if we continue to let these neocons co-opt the actual America First conservative movements, then we're never going to have any real right-wing or conservative victories for this country.
Okay.